Hi, my name is Isabelle Hart, and last month, I hosted my first housewarming dinner one my parents refused to attend. "We'll skip your housewarming, your sister just moved too," my mother texted. I typed back, "That's okay." But what she didn't know was that my house wasn't just any house. It was a $6 million oceanfront villa I designed and built with my own hands, soon to be featured on HGTV. That night, while my family stayed home celebrating my sister, I opened my doors to everyone who'd ever been overlooked: cousins, friends, neighbors, and for the first time, every person had a seat at the same table. No kids section. No hierarchy. Just belonging. When the HGTV episode aired and the calls started flooding in, I finally understood. Sometimes being excluded is the beginning of freedom. Have you ever been left out of something that mattered deeply to you? Tell me your story and let me know where you're watching from. I think that text from my mother hurt so much because it wasn't new. It was just another echo of what my life had always been: a life of being the shadow next to someone else's light. Growing up, every family celebration seemed designed to orbit around my younger sister, Chloe. Her birthday parties were backyard carnivals, balloons, themed cakes, kids running wild while our parents stood proudly by the grill, calling her their little star. Mine, on the other hand, were always simpler this year. A small cake, no candles sometimes, and the familiar line, "We'll celebrate properly next time, honey." But next time never came. Even during the New Year dinners, the adults would ask, "How's our Chloe doing at school?" And then, almost as an afterthought, "And Isabelle, you're helping her with homework, right?" I stopped correcting them after a while. I wasn't Isabelle, the daughter. I was Chloe's sister, the unspoken title that followed me everywhere. It wasn't that Chloe was cruel. She just never needed to try to be adored. She was soft-spoken but radiant, the kind of girl teachers praised and neighbors remembered. I was quieter, clumsier, with a mind always tinkering with things instead of people. I liked taking apart alarm clocks and sketching how gears fit together. But my parents didn't see value in that. "You'll make a mess," my mother would sigh whenever she found screws scattered on the table. Meanwhile, if Chloe glued a few glitter stars to a school poster, it became art. I still remember one spring festival when I was 10. Chloe performed a dance on stage at the community center: white dress, pink ribbons in her hair, the crowd clapping wildly. Afterward, my father lifted her into his arms and whispered, "That's my girl." The next week, I came home with a blue ribbon from the district science fair, first place for building a solar-powered model car. I ran to show him, heart racing, expecting that same proud smile. He glanced at it briefly and said, "That's nice, but don't stay up so late next time." My mother added, "Science fairs are fun, but dancing is more social." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if achievements still counted when no one cared to notice. As the years passed, the pattern deepened. When Chloe joined the cheerleading team, our house erupted in celebration: family dinner, balloons, new shoes for her big season. When I passed the entrance exam for the state engineering program, my parents barely looked up from the TV. "That's good," Dad murmured, "but are you sure you'll fit in with all those math people?" Mom just said, "Remember to help Chloe with her English project later." I started to realize that being overlooked wasn't a temporary phase, it was my position in the family hierarchy. Chloe was the golden child who reflected their ideal image of success. I was the utility child, the one who filled in gaps, carried boxes, fixed things when they broke. My world began to shrink to the corners of the house, especially the old shed out back. It was dusty, filled with the smell of cedar and rust, but to me it felt sacred. I began spending entire afternoons there, teaching myself how to use the saw and sandpaper, how to shape a crooked board until it became something beautiful. When Chloe was out shopping with Mom, I was cutting planks and fitting hinges, losing myself in the rhythm of creation. My first real project was a small table, nothing fancy, just 4 uneven legs and a top made from leftover plywood. But when I ran my hand across its rough surface, I felt something I had never felt before: worth. It wasn't perfect, but it existed because I had made it, not because someone gave me permission to. Whenever the arguments about favoritism flared, my parents would insist, "We love both of you equally." But equality is a feeling, not a sentence, and it was never something I felt. Even the smallest moments carried tiny cuts that built up over time. One Christmas morning, Chloe unwrapped a pearl bracelet with Mom saying, "You deserve this, sweetheart." My box, smaller and lighter, contained a notebook from the discount aisle. "You like writing things down, don't you?" Mom said absently. I smiled, said thank you, then retreated to the shed to write one sentence on the first page. "You're invisible unless you're useful." It became a quiet mantra, the kind that slips into your bones without you realizing it. In high school, the distance widened further. Chloe was the face everyone recognized: student council, homecoming, social events. I was the one behind the scenes, fixing decorations, handling logistics, making sure everything ran smoothly. Teachers would pat my shoulder and say, "You're such a good helper." Never leader, never talent, always helper. It taught me to measure my value in how much I could do for others, not who I actually was. The shed turned into my sanctuary. The scent of sawdust mixed with paint thinner clung to my hair and clothes. When the world upstairs became too loud with praise for Chloe, I would slip outside, close the door, and breathe in that wooden silence. I built shelves, stools, small birdhouses, anything that let my hands prove I still existed. My father once found me out there sanding a tabletop late at night. He shook his head and said, "You should be in bed. That's not proper work for a girl." I wanted to tell him it was the only thing that made me feel alive. But I stayed silent. By the time I graduated high school, that silence had become second nature. Chloe's college acceptance letter came with family toasts and a celebratory dinner at her favorite restaurant. When mine arrived, full scholarship in architecture, I placed it quietly on the fridge door, next to one of her old dance photos. No one mentioned it. At the farewell dinner before I left, Dad just said, "You're going far away. Try not to get lost in your books." Mom reminded me, "Call often, and if Chloe needs design ideas for her dorm, help her out." I smiled, nodded, and promised I would. Looking back now, I realized the shed had been my training ground all along. In that space filled with sawdust and solitude, I learned more than just carpentry. I learned independence, resilience, the art of shaping emptiness into form. Every nail I drove into wood was a rebellion against invisibility. Every shelf, every table, was proof that even if no one saw me, I could still create something solid, something that wouldn't vanish when attention drifted elsewhere. Still, those patterns left scars. Even after moving out, I carried the belief that love must be earned through usefulness, that to be seen, I had to build something extraordinary. Leaving home for college felt less like a rite of passage and more like escaping gravity. The night before I left, I stood in the shed one last time, my hand resting on the rough table I had built years earlier. The scent of moon kua still clung to the air, and I thought this was where I had learned to survive invisibility. Now, I wanted to build something bigger than furniture. I wanted to build spaces that made people feel seen, the way I never had. I moved to California on a scholarship to study architectural design and construction technology. The campus was enormous, sunlit, and overwhelming. I arrived with 2 suitcases, 1 pillow, and a notebook filled with sketches of rooms I'd never had: wide windows, soft light, a table where everyone had a seat. My first night in the dorm, I ate instant noodles by the window, watching city lights blink below me. It felt lonely, but also clean, like someone had pressed a reset button on my life. College was hard. Between classes and part-time jobs, I learned that brilliance meant little when your stomach growled during studio critiques. I worked as an assistant at a furniture workshop, cleaning paint trays, sweeping floors, and eventually sketching designs for small commissions. My fingertips were always blistered, but when I looked at the finished chairs or coffee tables, things that people touched and lived with, I felt a sense of quiet power. I was turning failure gore, discarded scraps, into something with purpose. And in that process, I was rebuilding myself too. During my second year, I discovered 3D design software and spent nights learning rendering techniques on an old laptop that overheated every hour. I took freelance gigs, online bathroom remodels, small apartment makeovers, even a cafe layout for a client in Portland. The pay barely covered rent, but each project taught me something new about texture, color, or light. My professors often said my designs felt personal, though they didn't know why. The truth was, every drawing came from the same wound. I was designing spaces where people were never made to feel like outsiders. Money was always tight. I shared a studio apartment with 2 classmates and often slept on a pull-out sofa covered in drafting paper. There were nights I'd fall asleep mid-sketch, pencil still in hand, alarm blaring at 5 a.m. so I could make it to my construction internship on time. On weekends, I worked at a cafe to afford materials. Sometimes I'd eat leftover croissants after closing and tell myself it tasted like ambition. The exhaustion was constant, but there was a strange beauty in it. Each day felt like one more plank added to the bridge, leading me away from the version of myself who used to sit in the corner of family dinners. In my final year, I landed an internship with a boutique renovation firm. They specialized in transforming old, neglected houses into modern, functional homes, exactly the kind of work that resonated with me. I learned about structural integrity, sustainable materials, and the subtle ways natural light can change the mood of a space. I soaked it all in. My supervisor once told me, "You see buildings the way some people see people. You look for the hurt first." I didn't correct him. He was right. After graduation, I didn't go home. Instead, I rented a tiny studio in Oakland, barely enough room for a bed and drafting desk. The walls were cracked, the ceiling leaked when it rained, but it was mine. I started taking on small private projects, redesigning kitchens, refurbishing furniture, optimizing storage in cramped apartments. My first client was a retired nurse who wanted her late husband's study turned into an art room. I spent weeks restoring old cabinets and painting the walls a pale gray blue. When she stepped in and whispered, "It feels like breathing again," I cried the moment she left. It was the first time someone said something that sounded like love, even if it wasn't meant that way. My parents didn't understand any of it. They still called once in a while, always asking about Chloe first. "She just got promoted," Mom would gush. "You two should talk, maybe she can help you network." When I mentioned my projects, there was a pause. Then came the same tone I knew too well. "Interior design is such a delicate hobby. But make sure you find something stable. And have you heard Chloe might buy a condo soon?" I learned to keep my updates short. "I'm fine, work's good." Then hang up before they could ask if I was dating anyone or if I planned to move back. But while they talked about stability, I was building something sturdier than they could imagine. By 24, I had saved enough to open a small design and build studio in a converted warehouse. I called it Second Form, a nod to the idea that everything, even broken things, deserved a second life. We specialized in restoring forgotten spaces. Old barns turned into cafes, cracked apartment walls reborn with light. Most of our furniture came from reclaimed wood. What others threw away, we transformed. Every screw and beam carried a whisper of the shed where I had once hidden. It wasn't glamorous. I hauled planks, managed budgets, met clients in thrifted blazers, and slept on my office couch when deadlines loomed. But slowly, word spread. People liked the sincerity of what we built. They said my spaces felt like home, and maybe that was because I was still searching for one myself. One night, after delivering a completed project, a small beach cabin renovation, I drove back along Highway 1 with the windows down. The sea was black and infinite, the moonlight flickering on the waves. I remember thinking, this is what freedom smells like, salt and sawdust. And yet, beneath the pride, there was still that ache, the quiet hope that one day my parents might see what I had made and say they were proud. But every phone call reminded me that their hearts were still elsewhere. "Chloe just bought her first house," Mom said one evening. "She's so mature for her age." I smiled into the silence. "That's great," I replied. "Maybe one day she'll hire me to design it." Mom laughed lightly, not realizing I meant it both as a joke and a wish. After the call, I stared at my blueprints scattered across the table, projects that had clients' names, not mine, and thought, maybe it's time I build something that's truly my own. That thought would eventually become the seed of my villa, the home I never had but always imagined. The one that would stand on a cliff and look directly into the horizon, untouched by comparison or exclusion. But back then, I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that from scraps and loneliness, I had learned to turn wood into beauty and emptiness into form. I had built enough to survive. Now, it was time to build something to live for. It began as nothing more than a quiet longing, a whisper that visited me every time I finished designing a home for someone else. Each time a client walked through their newly renovated space and said, "It finally feels like mine," I felt a pang deep inside. Because no matter how many homes I created for others, I didn't truly have one for myself. Not a rented apartment, not a borrowed sofa, something that belonged only to me. A place no one could take away, no one could tell me I didn't deserve. That longing led me north, along the Pacific coast, until I founded a windswept cliff just outside Cannon Beach, Oregon, where the land dropped sharply into the roaring ocean below. The property wasn't glamorous when I first saw it. A weather-beaten cottage sat crooked near the edge, its paint peeling, its windows fogged with salt. Most people would have turned away at the sight of corroded beams and cracked foundations, but I stood there with my boots sinking into the wet soil and thought, this is it. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, rough, forgotten, waiting for someone who could see potential beneath the rust. The realtor kept apologizing for the state of the place, but I barely heard her. I was already imagining walls of glass opening to the sea, the smell of cedar, the sound of waves echoing through open space. I signed the papers that week. It cost nearly everything I had, but I didn't care. For the first time, the word home didn't feel like a dream. When the permits were approved, the real work began. I wanted every inch of the villa to embody resilience, not just beauty. So I tore it down to its bones, keeping only the stone foundation and a handful of original beams that had withstood 40 years of storms. My concept was simple: strength and transparency. I designed a glass facade facing the Pacific, so the horizon would always be in sight. The structure would breathe with the sea open when calm, sealed tight when the winds turned wild. The kitchen island was carved from a single slab of volcanic stone, dark gray with faint silver veins that caught the morning light. A floating staircase of black steel spiraled upward, anchored by hidden rods inside the wall, each step measured and welded by hand. Along the terrace, I installed windshield glass panels that made it feel as though the sky itself extended into the ocean. I hired local craftsmen from the nearby towns, weathered men who knew the rhythm of storms better than any city contractor. There was Cal, the carpenter with salt gray hair and a laugh that rumbled like thunder, who taught me how to reinforce beams against sea wind. Lydia, a stonemason whose family had worked the Oregon cliffs for generations, carved the exterior ledges with bare hands and unshakable focus. And Miguel, a structural engineer who specialized in oceanfront builds, designed a foundation system that could hold firm even against salt corrosion. Together, we worked through rain, wind, and biting cold, our boots slipping on mud as gulls circled overhead. I was there every day. I never stood back with a clipboard the way most clients did. I was on the scaffolding, checking sealant lines, sanding wooden trims, feeling the grain of the cedar planks before approving them. Every door hinge, every faucet, every tile was something I personally touched. When the installers asked if I wanted standard silicone or marine grade for the windows, I chose the latter, more expensive, but better for fighting salt damage. One night, the wind howled so fiercely that I stayed on site, flashlight in hand, checking every joint along the glass walls to make sure no rain seeped through. I could have gone home, but, in some strange way, I already was home. The nights were long and cold. Sometimes I'd sit alone on the half-finished balcony, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, staring at the endless black expanse of the Pacific. The smell of salt and wet wood filled the air. It reminded me of the shed back home, only now, the pieces I was putting together were my life. I thought about how, in that small town, I had been invisible. And here, with nothing but ocean and wind as witnesses, I was finally visible, at least to myself. By the third year, the villa was complete. The final inspection passed without a single note. I remember walking barefoot through the finished hallway that first morning, the floor cool beneath my feet, the sunlight spilling through the glass, scattering in golden shards across the walls. The sea stretched endlessly beyond, silver and wild. Every corner breathed calm and intention: the cedar beams, the stone fireplace, the smooth walnut table in the dining area. I placed my old handmade table, the one from my childhood shed, in the study, refinished and sanded smooth. It was my reminder. This was where the invisible girl from Indiana had ended up. I didn't tell my family. Not about the purchase, not about the build, not even about the completion. If I had, they would have found a way to twist it to make it about Chloe. She must have had help, they'd say. Maybe Chloe inspired her. I wasn't ready to let them soil something sacred, so I told no one. My colleagues thought it was a private retreat project for a client. My friends only knew I disappeared to the coast every weekend. In the silence of secrecy, I felt free. One afternoon, as I was taking final photographs for the portfolio, a producer from HGTV reached out. They had seen a few of my previous before and after posts online and wanted to feature one of my transformations in a special episode about coastal architecture. I hesitated at first. Exposure wasn't something I craved, but then I realized it was an opportunity to honor the story of the house itself. So I agreed, on one condition: no names, no personal details. The crew arrived that summer, setting up drones and cameras, capturing every detail: the way sunlight rippled across the ocean glass, the craftsmanship of the beams, the serene minimalism of the kitchen. During the interviews, when they asked what inspired me, I smiled and said, I wanted to build a place where everyone has a view of the horizon, not just the people sitting at the head of the table. They nodded, not realizing the layers behind those words. When the filming wrapped, the crew thanked me, promising the episode would air by the end of the year. As the trucks pulled away, I stood on the terrace, listening to the last echoes of their voices fade into the sea wind. The villa was silent again, bathed in orange light from the setting. Sunday, I pressed my hand against the glass wall, felt the coolness of the surface, and whispered to no one in particular, "This is mine." That night, a storm rolled in. The waves crashed violently against the rocks below, spraying salt through the air, the wind howling like a choir of ghosts. I stayed awake, moving from room to room, checking seals and joints, tracing the edges of the silicone that held the glass firm against the pressure. It held. Everything I had built held. And somewhere between the roar of the sea and the beating of my heart, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. Because now, solitude wasn't punishment. It was proof that I had finally created a home no one could take away. The message came on a Thursday morning while I was arranging the final delivery of cutlery for the villa. The air smelled faintly of sea salt and varnish, that clean, expectant scent that always comes before something new begins. My phone buzzed on the marble counter. I didn't think much of it until I saw my mother's name flash across the screen. "We'll skip your housewarming. Your sister just moved too," keeping it small. I read it twice, then once more, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into kindness. They didn't. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I typed 2 words: "That's okay." Then I set the phone down and listened to the waves pounding against the cliffs below. For a long time, I stood there staring at the horizon, feeling the same dull ache that had followed me all my life, the ache of being quietly dismissed. But this time, the feeling didn't consume me. It clarified me. I realized, with startling calm, that I was done waiting for permission to celebrate my own life. That afternoon, I opened my contacts list and began scrolling. One by one, I called people who had once been pushed aside in small, familiar ways: my cousins, who were always left out of Christmas invitations; my college friend Rachel, whose own parents had missed her graduation; the older neighbor from my apartment days who spent holidays alone after her divorce. For years, we had all lived on the outskirts of other people's stories, pretending it didn't hurt. Now, I wanted to give them something different, a night where no one sat at the edge of the table. The calls started awkwardly. "A party?" Rachel asked, half laughing. "I thought you weren't the party type." I smiled, watching sunlight flicker across the glass wall. "Not a party," I said. "A dinner, real food, real people, no pretense. Saturday night, my place." She hesitated. "Where exactly is your place?" I told her it was by the coast, a small retreat I'd been building. She didn't need to know yet that it was a $6 million villa featured on national television. I wanted her and everyone else to come for the right reason, to belong. Within an hour, word began to spread. My cousin Eli texted back almost instantly. "A dinner that doesn't revolve around the Golden Children? Count me in." Aunt Marianne called to say she hadn't seen the family together in years, and that she'd bake her famous lemon tart if I promised there would be room at the main table for her this time. "There's only one table," I told her, "and everyone's sitting at it." By evening, my quiet house was alive with motion. I pulled out a notebook and began sketching plans the way I used to design client projects, but this time, the blueprint was for a feeling. I wrote headings: menu, music, rooms, guests. Under menu, I listed dishes that spoke warmth: herb-roasted chicken, wild mushroom risotto, fresh bread from the local baker, honey cake. Under music, soft jazz and acoustic guitar. Under rooms, I noted every guest's name beside a bedroom: Rachel and her husband in the West Wing, Aunt Marianne in the suite overlooking the sea, Eli in the guest room near the library. Each space would hold someone who had once been made to feel like they didn't belong. I called the chef from town, a kind woman named Margaret, who had catered one of my renovation launches. When I explained what I wanted, she said softly, "You're not just hosting a dinner, are you?" I laughed quietly. "No," I said. "I'm building a new table." Over the next 2 days, preparations unfolded like choreography. I ordered fresh linens in cream and soft gray, arranged wildflowers from the hillside into handmade ceramic vases, and placed name cards at each seat, handwritten, elegant, all the same size. There was no kids' table, no hierarchy. Every plate, every chair was given equal space. When the long oak table finally stretched across the great room, polished and glowing under the chandeliers, I stood back and saw what I had been trying to build my entire life. It wasn't just a dinner setting. It was proof that inclusion could be designed, that belonging could have form and light and fragrance. On Friday night, as the last deliveries arrived, I sat by the fire with a cup of tea, reviewing my list once more. 15 guests confirmed. 15 people who, like me, had spent years watching others celebrated while they stood in the background. I imagined them walking through the doors tomorrow, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the glow of the fire reflected on their faces. The thought filled me with something warm and steady, a kind of peace that didn't need anyone's approval to exist. Outside, the waves crashed hard against the rocks, and the wind rattled the glass panes. I looked around at the space I had created: walls of cedar, floors of polished stone, the soft hum of the ocean beyond. Every corner told the same story. That sometimes, when your family keeps you outside their table long enough, you learn to build one yourself: longer, stronger, and wide enough for everyone who knows what it's like to be forgotten. I picked up my phone one last time that night, not to scroll or check for messages, but to send a single group text. Saturday, 6 p.m., dinner at the villa. Come hungry, come as you are. No one's sitting on the sidelines this time. Then I turned the phone face down, blew out the candle, and let the house fall silent. The sea kept roaring outside, but inside, for the first time in my life, everything felt ready, not for approval, not for show, but for belonging. The next morning, the villa came alive in a quiet rhythm of preparation. The sky outside was the color of pewter, clouds moving low over the ocean, and the sound of waves folded softly into the house through the half-open glass doors. The salt air mixed with the faint scent of cedar from the floors, and as I walked barefoot across the cool stone tiles, I felt that rare stillness before a gathering like the world was holding its breath. I started with the decor. The long oak table faced the sea, stretching parallel to the horizon. I ran my hand along its surface, feeling every grain and groove, then unrolled the linen runners I had chosen from a small studio in Portland. The fabric was rough but elegant, a warm sand color that mirrored the beach below. I placed simple white plates, polished silver cutlery, and crystal glasses that caught the late morning light like drops of water. Each setting had a name card written in soft graphite ink, my handwriting, careful and even. The centerpiece was a cascade of white eucalyptus and olive branches, interwoven with sprigs of dried lavender. The fragrance was subtle, clean, with a whisper of earth. Out on the terrace, Tom, the handyman from town, was stringing hundreds of tiny golden bulbs across the beams, draping them along the railing that framed the view of the cliffs. When dusk came, they would glow like stars caught in a net. "Keep them low enough to dance under," I told him, and he grinned, adjusting the height until I nodded. I added sea salt candles in glass jars, their wicks tied with twine, and placed them along the path leading from the front gate to the great hall. The scent, a mix of ocean breeze and sandalwood, would greet guests before they even stepped inside. Inside, I moved from room to room, personalizing each space the way I used to design for clients, except this time, it wasn't about aesthetics. It was about memory, care, and recognition. I wanted every person who entered to feel quietly seen. In the East guest room, I left a stack of classic novels beside Aunt Marianne's bed: Pride and Prejudice, Little Women, The Nightingale. She once told me she read when she couldn't sleep, that stories made her feel less alone. On the nightstand, I placed a small card that read, "For the woman who taught me that quiet strength still counts." In the children's room, I unpacked the ocean-themed Lego set I had ordered: ships, dolphins, tiny divers, and arranged it neatly on the floor so Rachel's kids would see it the moment they entered. I could already picture their laughter echoing through the hall, their small hands building something new. For Grandma, whose arthritis kept her from walking too far, I chose the cozy corner suite near the fireplace. I brewed a jar of her favorite herbal tea, chamomile with honey and mint, and left it beside a wool scarf I'd found in town, ash gray and soft as a sigh. On the note, I wrote, "So you can stay warm while watching the waves." That even Uncle Ray, who rarely spoke and always complained about the cold, had a place prepared. On his chair I draped a hand-knitted navy throw, thick and coarse, the kind that carried the smell of rain and wool. These weren't extravagant gestures. They were quiet assurances, proof that everyone here mattered. By noon, the kitchen filled with life. Margaret, the chef I'd hired, arrived with 2 assistants and boxes of fresh produce from the farmer's market: oysters, clams, wild salmon, thyme, rosemary, and a loaf of sourdough still warm from the oven. The villa's open kitchen was designed around the hearth: black granite counters, a long walnut island, copper pans hanging from hooks that gleamed like coins. Margaret unpacked her knives with reverence and got to work. Soon, the air was thick with the smell of butter and garlic sizzling, the sound of a ladle stirring seafood chowder, the occasional pop of oil from the cedar plank salmon roasting over the flame. "This kitchen was made for comfort," she said, glancing around. "Not for show." I smiled. That was exactly what I'd intended. While the kitchen hummed, the 2 musicians I'd invited arrived: a guitarist named Lucas and a violinist named June, both locals. They carried their instruments carefully, cases damp with sea mist. "Play what feels like home," I told them. As they tuned, soft notes floated through the air, wrapping around the clatter of pans and the rhythmic crash of the waves outside. The combination created something unplanned but beautiful, a kind of living symphony. Meanwhile, the HGTV camera crew was setting up outside. They'd returned to film a few final shots for the feature background B-roll to capture the villa in its lived-in glow. I had agreed, mostly because I wanted the story of the house to end the way it began, not as a monument of architecture, but as a space filled with life. The cinematographer crouched near the deck to capture the reflection of the lights in the window glass. Another adjusted the drone hovering above the terrace, its lens sweeping across the cliffside where the ocean stretched infinite and blue. I watched silently as they filmed, the camera catching details I hadn't noticed before. The way the linen fluttered in the wind, the soft gleam of the table runner, the flicker of candles waiting to be lit. When they asked to film me preparing for the dinner, I agreed on one condition: no dialogue, just hands. So they followed me as I placed the name cards, adjusted the candles, smoothed a wrinkle on the runner. The lens caught small things: my bracelets glinting in the sunlight, a single strand of hair blowing across my face as I leaned over the table, my fingers tracing the edge of a wine glass to align it with the plate. "Perfect," one of them whispered. I didn't smile for the camera. I smiled for myself. By late afternoon, the wind shifted. It carried a cooler edge, smelling of salt and distant rain. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold over the cliffs. Light filled the great room, dancing across the floors, catching on every glass and polished surface. The villa looked alive, not polished, not staged, but warm and breathing. I stepped outside onto the terrace, barefoot, my hair whipping around my face. From there, the long table looked like it floated above the sea, the candles flickering against the endless horizon. Inside, Margaret was testing the chowder, Lucas was plucking soft guitar chords, and June's violin thread wove through the air like silk. The sound was tender, nostalgic, the kind that made you want to pause mid-step just to listen. I leaned against the doorway, inhaling deeply. Butter, salt, eucalyptus, cedar smoke. The scents layered together until they became inseparable, like pieces of one long memory. I glanced at the clock. 5:15 p.m. The first guests would be here soon. Everything, the lights, the music, the table, was ready. But more than that, I was ready. I had spent years preparing spaces for other people to belong in. Now, finally, I had built one for myself and for everyone who had ever been told they didn't fit. As the last rays of daylight stretched across the floor, I walked slowly through the villa, running my hand along the back of each chair, straightening one final fork, adjusting the drape of the curtains. Then I stopped in front of the wide glass wall facing the ocean. Outside, the sky was beginning to shift from gold to lilac. I could hear the faint hum of an engine on the winding road below, the first car approaching. The lights along the terrace flickered on, glowing like a trail of stars leading up the hill. I exhaled, a deep, steady breath. The kind you take right before something changes forever. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of salt and wood, the soft sound of waves, and the promise of footsteps drawing nearer, I realized that I wasn't nervous. I wasn't seeking approval. I was simply ready to open the doors. Because this wasn't about showing what I had built, it was about who I was finally building it for. By 6 o'clock, the first headlights wound up the coastal road, golden beams cutting through the violet dusk. The air outside was crisp, smelling of salt and pine. I stood by the front doors, their black steel frames catching the soft reflection of the string lights above the terrace. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for approval or pretending not to care if someone didn't show up. I simply felt steady. A silver SUV came to a slow stop in the gravel driveway. The back door opened before the engine even went quiet. Two small children leapt out, shouting over one another, their voices bright and wild against the hum of the ocean. "Aunt Izzy," they cried. Rachel's kids. I hadn't seen them since the pandemic, but somehow they ran straight toward me as if no time had passed. "Is this your house?" the little boy asked, eyes wide as he looked toward the glass wall that opened into the sea. I smiled and knelt to his level. Ours tonight, I said. You'll see. Behind them came Rachel, carrying a bottle of wine in one hand and her shoes in the other, her husband trailing behind with bags of homemade cookies. You didn't tell us it was this, she said, glancing at the villa, her voice half awe, half disbelief. It's beautiful, Izzy. I shrugged, smiling. I just wanted somewhere everyone could breathe. More cars followed. Cousin Eli arrived next, bringing his girlfriend and his mother Aunt Marianne, who wore a thick wool coat and carried her lemon tart wrapped in a dish towel. I baked the crust twice, she said proudly as I took it from her. It always breaks the first time. She stepped inside and froze, looking around at the great room glowing under the pendant lights. My word, she whispered. You built this? I nodded. She pressed her hand to her heart, her eyes soft. Your mother has no idea, does she? She asked gently. No, I said, and that's okay. Within the next half hour, the villa filled with laughter, footsteps, the soft pop of champagne corks. The children discovered the infinity pool that spilled seamlessly into the edge of the cliff. It looks like it goes straight into the ocean. One of them shouted. I warned them to stay back from the edge, but secretly smiled at their wonder. Others wandered toward the stone steps leading down to the beach, their shoes crunching lightly against the gravel path as the sky deepened from lavender to deep indigo. Inside, the musicians had begun to play the low strum of Lucas's guitar and the sweet, aching pull of June's violin blending with the rhythm of the waves outside. It wasn't background music, it was conversation in another language, one that everyone seemed to understand. As each guest arrived, I guided them personally to their rooms. I wanted them to feel seen. Aunt Marianne laughed out loud when she found the novels stacked on her nightstand. You remembered, she said, tracing the cover of Little Women. Of course I did, I told her. You gave me my first copy. In another room, Grandma was seated comfortably near the fire, her cup of tea steaming beside her. She looked up as I entered, her silver hair glowing orange in the firelight. You've done well, sweetheart, she said softly. You made it warm. Her words landed somewhere deep in me, somewhere that had been cold for a very long time. By 7, everyone had gathered around the long oak table, which stretched toward the panoramic window facing the ocean. The candles flickered, reflecting off glass and silverware, and the scent of roasted cedar plank salmon filled the air. I had placed Grandma at the center, with the children on either side so she could hold their small hands between hers. There was no head of the table. Every seat had equal space, equal light. The table was built to erase the hierarchy I had grown up with: no kid's corner, no seat of honor that made others small. As we sat, the sounds of the sea mingled with laughter and music. Margaret ladled steaming chowder into each bowl, the aroma of thyme and cream spreading warmth through the air. I lifted my glass first, not to toast achievement or success, but something simpler. Thank you, I said. Just 2 words at first. The room quieted. The violin hummed softly behind me. I looked around at Rachel, at Eli, at Grandma's gentle smile, at the kids swinging their legs under the table. Thank you for coming, for showing up, for being the kind of people who make the world softer just by sitting down. Aunt Marianne dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And for a brief moment, the villa didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a heartbeat, a single, steady rhythm holding us all together. Dinner unfolded slowly, like a story being told. Between bites and laughter, old memories surfaced. Aunt Marianne recalled a Lunar New Year when she and my mother were young, how the adults had sent her to eat in the kitchen with the children because there wasn't enough room at the main table. I promised myself that night, she said, her voice trembling, that if I ever hosted, there would be a chair for everyone. She smiled through tears. You did it for me tonight, Isabelle. You made room. Doozy. Rachel leaned back in her chair, wine glass in hand, and said, My parents skipped my graduation dinner. They said flights were too expensive. The table fell quiet for a moment. Then she laughed softly, not bitterly but in release. Now I think maybe I was meant to end up here instead. The children started humming along with the violin, clinking their spoons against their glasses to mimic percussion. The sound was chaotic, joyful, alive. Even Uncle Ray, who usually ate in silence, leaned over to tell one of the kids a story about the time he nearly burned his eyebrows off lighting a barbecue. Everyone laughed until tears came. As dessert was served Marianne's lemon tart with whipped cream, I stood again, not to speak, but just to watch. The candlelight shimmered on faces that had once known rejection, now glowing with belonging. The wind pressed softly against the glass wall, and beyond it, the Pacific stretched endlessly, dark and wild and forgiving. The musicians shifted to a slower melody. Lucas strummed something tender, and June followed with a high note that floated like light over water. Grandma closed her eyes, swaying slightly, her hands still wrapped around the little boy's fingers. I realized then that the sound of their laughter mixed with the sea and the violin was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I caught Rachel's gaze from across the table, and she mouthed silently, "You did this." I smiled back, shaking my head. "We did this," I whispered. When the plates were cleared and the last song ended, I gathered everyone by the terrace for a photo. The string lights glowed above us, and the ocean wind tugged gently at our clothes. We stood close, 15 people who had once been strangers in their own families, now woven together by something invisible but strong. I set the camera timer, ran to the center, and wrapped my arm around Grandma's shoulder just as the shutter clicked. The photo captured everything: the laughter, the warmth, the light bouncing off glass and waves. Later, when everyone drifted into conversation and music, I stepped away for a moment and opened my phone. Without hesitation, I uploaded the group photo to the family group chat, the one that had been silent for months except for occasional updates about Chloe. The caption was simple: "Dinner tonight. Everyone had a seat." Then I locked the screen and placed the phone face down beside my glass. The message wasn't meant to provoke. It was a statement of truth, a quiet declaration that I had stopped waiting for a table to be built for me. The room behind me echoed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. The night smelled of citrus and salt. For the first time, the ache in my chest wasn't loneliness, it was fullness. As I stood on the terrace looking out at the dark horizon, the wind catching strands of my hair, I whispered the only words that truly belonged to me now, the ones that had waited years to be spoken out loud. "Thank you for coming." 4 words, simple and whole. Inside, someone started a song again. The violin rose, the waves answered, and the light from the villa spilled out onto the cliff like warmth refusing to fade. That night, I finally understood, sometimes healing doesn't arrive in grand apologies or perfect justice. Sometimes, it's a table, one long table where everyone is seen, everyone is fed, and no one ever has to sit in the corner again. The morning after the dinner felt like the sea itself had decided to rest. The air was soft and cool, the tide gentle. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls in thin gold ribbons, touching the edge of the long oak table still scattered with half-melted candles and empty glasses. I padded across the floor barefoot, every step quiet against the cedar planks. The house smelled faintly of lemon, eucalyptus, and the ghosts of last night's feast. My phone buzzed on the counter, a notification from HGTV. Episode airing tonight, Coastal Revival, The Hidden Villa on the Cliff. I stared at the words for a moment, the way you look at something familiar yet unreal. The camera crew had told me the release date weeks ago, but I hadn't expected it to land today, less than 24 hours after the dinner that had changed everything. I smiled, imagining my guests sitting together again, this time not at my table but in their own homes, watching the story of how it all began. By late afternoon, the villa hummed with energy again. Rachel had offered to stay another day with the kids, and Eli had canceled his train ticket back to Portland. "We can't miss the premiere," he'd said, grinning like a kid waiting for fireworks. Margaret returned with extra sourdough loaves and a basket of clams. For chowder refills, she'd insisted, and Tom strung a white sheet across the terrace railing, transforming it into a makeshift outdoor theater. As dusk settled, everyone gathered outside, wrapped in blankets, cups of cocoa in their hands. The sea stretched endless and black beyond the terrace, waves glinting silver under the moonlight. Lucas tuned his guitar one last time and plucked a few soft notes before the screen flickered to life. The HGTV logo glowed against the fabric, and then there it was. My villa. The drone shot opened with the cliff itself, the Pacific rolling beneath like liquid glass. The camera swooped low, tracing the curve of the coastline before rising toward the house perched above it, a glimmer of cedar and glass, light spilling through its windows like fire. Everyone gasped. Even though they had been inside it just last night, seeing it from that angle made it feel almost mythic. The camera moved closer, through the wide glass doors, into the great room where I was shown arranging eucalyptus on the table, smoothing the linen runner, my hair tied back loosely, the sun cutting gold across the wood. The narrator's voice filled the night air. When designer Isabelle Hart set out to build her coastal villa, she wanted to create not just a home but a table long enough for everyone who'd ever been left without a seat. Rachel turned to me, her mouth slightly open. You said it, didn't you? That exact line. I laughed softly. I guess it stuck with them. The episode moved between wide drone sweeps and quiet close-ups, my hands fitting brass handles to drawers. Margaret stirring soup in the gleaming kitchen, Tom securing glass panels against the wind, the musicians tuning their instruments. The editing was cinematic. A long shot of me standing by the railing at sunset, the sea turning molten behind me. I could hear my own voice in the background, recorded months earlier during the interview. I grew up at tables where some people were celebrated and others were simply tolerated. I wanted to build a place where no one had to wonder if they belonged. No one spoke for a long while. The sound of waves filled the silence. Then Grandma's voice, soft but firm. That's your heart, Isabelle, not just your home. As the episode drew to its final minutes, the screen showed scenes from the dinner plates being set, candles flickering, laughter bouncing through the room. The camera lingered on faces: Aunt Marianne smiling through tears, the kids building Lego ships, Eli strumming his guitar, Grandma holding her teacup steady. The music swelled, and the narrator closed with a single line that felt like it had been written for my younger self. Sometimes the truest homes are built not from walls, but from the courage to start your own table. The credits rolled, soft piano music trailing behind, and the night fell still again. The only sound was the ocean, steady and endless. Then my phone began to buzz. Once. Twice. Then again. The screen lit up with call after call. Mom. Dad. Chloe. I watched it vibrate across the table like something alive, desperate to be heard. Rachel leaned closer. You okay? I smiled faintly and picked it up, letting it ring out. I'm fine, I said. Just the past catching up. Another call. Then messages. The preview lines flashed one after another. Isabelle, why didn't you tell us it was your house on TV? We just watched the episode. The whole town is talking. Your father says the pastor mentioned it in service. Oh, you embarrassed us. Everyone's asking why we weren't there. I took a slow sip of cocoa, the sweetness grounding me. My reflection shimmered faintly on the phone screen, overlaid with the furious stream of notifications. Then, calmly, I began typing. I invited you. You said you were busy with Chloe. I hit send. Then turned the phone face down on the table, just as the final song from the episode replayed faintly through the speakers. Around me, the others had started to talk again, laughing about seeing themselves on TV, joking about who looked best on camera. Eli called out, next time, we'll wear matching outfits for the drone shot. Everyone laughed. The tension in the air dissolved, replaced again by warmth. But inside, I understood exactly what was happening miles away in the quiet living room of my parents' house, where the television light still flickered across their stunned faces. They weren't calling out of love. They were calling out of fear. Fear of how it looked. Fear that for once, the story the whole town saw didn't revolve around Chloe, but around me. The sea roared louder below the cliffs, as if echoing something deep within me. That old ache turned into calm certainty. I had spent my whole life trying to be seen. Tonight, they finally saw me, but not because I begged for it. Because I built something they could no longer ignore. I stood, looking toward the black horizon, the string lights swaying gently above me. Behind me, laughter filled the air again. The episode might have ended, but my story had only just begun. The calls didn't stop. By the next morning, my phone was still buzzing like a trapped wasp. Missed calls, voice messages, then a long string of texts from my mother, alternating between guilt, denial, and panic. The HGTV episode had exploded overnight. People from our hometown had tagged the villa's location, sharing screenshots, quoting my lines about building a table where everyone belongs. It wasn't just a show anymore. It had become a mirror, one they couldn't escape. By noon, I knew I couldn't keep ignoring it. Not because I owed them a response, but because silence would no longer protect the truth. I called Grandma first. She had watched the episode twice already and had texted me early that morning. "Proud of you, darling. Don't let them twist what they chose to ignore." When she answered, her voice was calm, almost expectant. "They'll call again," she said, "and when they do, keep me on the line." It didn't take long. My phone rang. Mom. I pressed accept, switched to speaker, and placed it on the cedar table in the living room. Grandma sat beside me, her cup of tea steaming, her eyes sharp despite her gentleness. "Isabelle," my mother began, her tone soft but tight. "We saw the show last night. I think there's been a misunderstanding." I said nothing. I let the sound of the ocean fill the gap. She cleared her throat. "You know how television works, they edit things to make drama. Your father and I were shocked by how they portrayed everything. We never excluded you. It just looked that way. And besides, your sister was moving that weekend." "Mom," I interrupted, quiet but firm. "You didn't exclude me because of editing. You did it in a text." Silence. "I have it right here," I continued. "We'll skip your housewarming, your sister just moved too. That's what you wrote, there's no confusion." On the other end, I could hear her exhale. Then, the familiar pivot, the emotional acrobatics I'd heard all my life. "You're twisting things again, Isabelle. You always make it sound worse than it was. We just wanted to keep things simple. Chloe, she's been under a lot of stress lately. You know how delicate she is." "One." I laughed softly, not bitterly, just tired. "Mom, I spent years watching how delicate Chloe was. Every birthday, every graduation, every Christmas, all of it revolved around her. You called it love. I called it invisibility. Now, that's unfair," she snapped, her softness cracking. "You were never invisible. We've always been proud of you. But you didn't need as much attention. You were independent, capable. We didn't have to worry about you the way we did with Chloe." There it was, the oldest wound dressed as a compliment. I looked at Grandma. Her lips pressed together, trembling slightly. I turned back to the phone. "You didn't worry about me because you never really saw me. You called it independence, but it was abandonment dressed up as praise." Before she could answer, Grandma's voice cut in, steady, clear, impossible to ignore. "Judy," she said, her tone heavy with decades of restrained patience. "Stop. Stop." "Mother." "No," Grandma said, sharper now. "You've done this all her life. I watched you do it. Every time Isabelle reached for your attention, you deflected it toward Chloe. Every time she accomplished something, you found a way to make it smaller so Chloe could shine. You told yourself it was fairness, but it wasn't. It was favoritism." My mother's breath hitched. "That's not true." It is true, Grandma said, her voice shaking with contained emotion. I remember Christmas when Isabelle was 14. She sat by the tree all morning with no present while you told her she was too old for toys. And that year she won that science fair, you brushed it off like it was nothing, yet threw Chloe a party for making the cheer squad. Do you think I don't remember? Do you think she forgot? On the other end, silence. Only the faint rustle of fabric, my mother probably standing, pacing, trying to compose herself. Grandma continued, quieter now but unflinching. You've built your world around Chloe's comfort, not around fairness. And now that the truth has aired for everyone to see, you're embarrassed, not sorry. Because for the first time, the town isn't talking about Chloe's perfection. They're talking about the daughter you tried to forget. Mother, please. No, Grandma said again. This isn't cruelty, this is correction. The wound doesn't heal until someone names it. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from something deeper. Vindication, maybe. The kind that doesn't taste like revenge, but like air after years of suffocation. My mother tried again, her voice trembling now, softer. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I thought Isabelle didn't mind. Grandma sighed. She minded. She just learned silence because you rewarded her for disappearing. There was a pause so long that I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. My father's voice entered faintly in the background, gruff and defensive. That's enough. We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't know she'd take it this far. This far, I repeated quietly. You mean success? Or being seen? He didn't answer. I looked toward the window. The ocean was steel blue, restless under the wind. You know, I said slowly, I never asked to be the favorite. I never even asked to be celebrated. I just wanted a seat, one ordinary chair where I didn't have to prove I deserved to sit there. No reply. Only the faint sound of breathing. Then, softly, Grandma spoke again, the final word. Fairness, she said, isn't something you start claiming when the world is watching. It's something you practice when no one is. The silence on the line was absolute. Even the waves outside seemed to pause. I reached over and pressed end call, the screen going dark. For a long time, I didn't move. Grandma rested her hand over mine. You didn't need to win that argument, she said gently. You just needed to stop carrying it. I nodded, my throat tightening. The air between us filled with the sound of the sea and the faint hum of the wind through the glass walls. I wasn't angry anymore. Just free. Because for the first time, the truth had been spoken out loud, not by me trying to prove it, but by someone who had witnessed it all. The kind of truth that doesn't need shouting. The kind that finally, quietly, ends the story. That night, long after the call ended, my phone began to buzz again, this time, not with confrontation, but connection. The family group chat that had once been a graveyard of one-word replies suddenly bloomed to life. Rachel sent the first message, a picture of the bonfire from 2 nights ago, the children wrapped in blankets, their faces glowing in the firelight. Still thinking about that night, she wrote. Next year at the villa again. Eli replied almost instantly. I'll bring my guitar and the whole band. Aunt Marianne added a string of heart emojis and wrote, best family gathering in years. Isabelle, you reminded us what it means to belong. One by one, more photos poured in, Grandma holding her teacup, the kids building their Lego ships, the musicians smiling beside the sea. The thread filled with warmth, laughter, plans for next Christmas, and gentle jokes about who'd claim the best guest room. For the first time, the conversation didn't orbit around Chloe or my parents. It flowed freely, organically, as if the gravitational pull that had always centered on them had finally released. I watched the messages stack up and smiled, my chest loosening. Healing, I realized, doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a quiet chat thread lighting up at midnight. Still, a part of me knew the story wasn't quite done. I didn't want to leave things suspended in resentment. Closure, I'd learned, isn't about erasing pain, it's about letting it rest. So the next morning, as frost glittered across the glass railing of the terrace, I typed a short message to my parents. Dinner this Sunday. Just us. No cameras, no guests. I hesitated before adding one last line. If you'd like to talk, really talk, the table's open. They didn't reply right away, but 3 hours later, my father sent a simple thumbs up. My mother followed with, "We'll come." No emojis, no punctuation. But it was enough. Sunday arrived gray and cold. The wind from the ocean carried a kind of cleansing quiet, and the villa felt larger than usual, echoing, almost reverent. I didn't prepare anything extravagant. No floral centerpieces, no glowing string lights. Just a small table for four set near the fireplace. A loaf of bread still warm from the oven, a pot of soup, and roasted sea bass with lemon and herbs. The kind of meal meant for conversation, not spectacle. When their car pulled up the drive, I caught sight of them through the window, hesitant, subdued. My mother clutched her scarf tight, my father lingered behind her, hands deep in his pockets. Chloe stepped out last, her eyes scanning the villa with quiet awe. She hadn't been here before. For once, there was no trace of smugness on her face, just the tentative look of someone walking into a story she didn't expect to be part of. I met them at the door. "Come in," I said simply. Inside, the crackle of the fire filled the silence that followed. My mother ran her fingers lightly along the back of a chair, almost to steady herself. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Different from what I imagined." "It's home," I said. "Not perfect, but mine." We sat down, the air thick with unsaid words. For a while, we ate quietly. My father complimented the food. Chloe asked about the sea view, her voice soft, uncertain. My mother kept her gaze mostly on her plate. Finally, I set my fork down. "I didn't invite you here to revisit the show," I said gently. "Or the calls. I just wanted to talk about what's never been said." No one interrupted. So, I began. I told them about the Christmas mornings when I'd sat by the tree pretending not to notice there were no gifts for me. About the science fair trophy that collected dust on the shelf while the whole family threw a party for Chloe's cheerleading win. About the night I ate noodles alone in my dorm while they sent Chloe money for a new laptop. I spoke of my graduation, the one they missed because they said it was too far, and how I'd walked across that stage scanning the crowd for faces that weren't there. My voice didn't shake. It wasn't anger anymore, just truth measured, steady. "I don't need apologies," I said quietly. "I just need you to understand how it felt. To spend years being told I was strong enough to be ignored." For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the pop of wood in the fire. Then my father exhaled slowly and said, "Maybe I didn't see it all." His voice was rough, unfamiliar in its humility. "I thought you didn't need us. That you were fine on your own. Maybe that was just me making it easier to look away." My mother's eyes shimmered. She set down her spoon, her voice small but clear. "I was proud of you, Isabelle. I just didn't know how to say it. You were always ahead of us somehow. With Chloe, I knew how to help. With you, I only knew how to admire from a distance." She hesitated, her lip trembling. "That distance became habit. I'm sorry." I nodded, absorbing her words like slow sunlight. They didn't erase the years, but they mattered. Then I turned to Chloe. She hadn't spoken the whole time. Her fingers twisted in her lap, knuckles pale. Finally, she lifted her head and met my eyes. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I thought you wanted to stay away. You never said anything." "I did," I said. "Just not in words you were listening for." She nodded, a faint tremor passing through her. "Then maybe this is me listening now." For a moment, the silence between us wasn't heavy, it was fragile, like something newly built that needed care not to break. When dinner ended, I walked them to the door. My mother hugged me not tightly, but longer than I expected. My father placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your mother's right, it's beautiful here. You've built something solid." Chloe lingered behind, glancing once more at the long table before whispering, "You really made your own world." I smiled faintly. "There's still room at the table if you ever want to join it the right way." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened, and that was enough. After they left, I stood by the window watching their car wind down the hill until the taillights disappeared. The house fell quiet again, the only sound the rhythmic pull of the tide. I walked back to the table, still warm from where they'd sat, and blew out the candles one by one. For the first time, I didn't feel like a daughter trying to earn her place. I felt like a woman who had finally made peace with where she stood. The wound hadn't vanished, but it had closed. And sometimes, that's all healing really needs. That night, after the last candle burned down to a soft pool of wax, I stepped out onto the terrace alone. The wind had quieted, and the ocean shimmered under the moonlight, dark, vast, eternal. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the wooden bench I'd built myself, the same one that overlooked the cliffs. Down below, the waves struck the rocks in steady rhythm, like the slow heartbeat of something ancient. For a long time, I just breathed. No noise, no performance, no phone lighting up with notifications. Just me and the sound of the sea. I thought about everything that had happened, the text that started it all, the dinner, the broadcast, the confrontation, and finally, the quiet meal with my family. It had been years of waiting for someone else to offer me a seat at their table. Tonight, I finally understood. I had never needed their invitation. I smiled faintly, watching the horizon fade into silver. "I'm not waiting for a chair anymore," I whispered to the wind. "I built the whole table myself." 1. The sentence hung in the air, carried off by the sea breeze. And for the first time, it didn't sound like defiance, it sounded like peace. Because that's what this journey had become. Not revenge, not even recognition, but reclamation of space, of voice, of worth. Every plank of this villa, every thread of linen, every candle and piece of cedar carried a small piece of the girl who once sat quietly at the edge of someone else's celebration. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had built her own home, her own story, her own family of those who chose to show up. I looked out at the horizon and thought of everyone who might be listening, those who've spent their lives trying to be noticed, to be good enough, to earn love that should have been given freely. If you're one of them, I want you to remember this. You don't need anyone's approval to have worth. You are already enough, even if no one ever told you. Don't wait for someone to give you a seat at their table. Build your own. Craft it from the parts of your story that once hurt the most, and let those scars become the grain in the wood. Then, when it's ready, only invite the people who know how to treat it with care, the ones who see you, not for what you can give, but for who you are. I leaned back, listening to the ocean breathe, the stars glimmering like 1,000 tiny yeses from the sky. Somewhere inside me, the little girl who once waited by the tree without a gift finally exhaled. If you're hearing my story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been overlooked during one of the biggest moments of your life? If you have, tell me your story, share it in the comments. And let me know where you're watching from. Because maybe, just maybe, your story and mine aren't so different after all. The waves rolled in, soft and sure. I closed my eyes, whispered a quiet goodnight to the ocean, and smiled knowing that for the first time in my life, I wasn't reaching for their table anymore. I had built my own, and it was finally, beautifully full.